And for those of you that aren't familiar with a fishbowl, think of a fish swimming around in a bowl and how you would watch them, right? Maybe you do, maybe you don't watch. The idea here is that you're going to have a collective conversation from people that have different perspectives and different experiences. So we'll introduce a couple of people in a moment, but there are going to be 3 parts to this afternoon's journey. Part 1 is going to be in a fishbowl, and there will be part A, which is, I'm looking for Stefanie here. So part A is going to be a little bit of an introduction and a group dialogue here amongst these 5 people, okay? And then there will be a little bit of a pause, and then there will be a part B that will have more audience participation. And we will move towards kind of what are we hearing? What have we been hearing that will help us think about the challenges we face moving forward? Okay. Think I got all that right? Give me a nod. Yeah, good enough. Good enough. Got it. Great. And, let's think about where we are on the me to we journey. Following the fishbowl, we will go into exploring a bit more in small groups. So the group hunger that people have been having to really dig in, we will get to that a little bit later this afternoon. Okay, so Lynette and I are both here to do a couple of quick introductions, real quick, because they're going to introduce some more. So I am introducing, just happens, 2 people on one side of the table. Greg, I'm going to start with you. Greg has one of the longest histories being a part of the forum that stems through his family from his father. But I could say all sorts of things, but I'm keeping this really short. I love you. Thank you for being here. You've done a lot to develop me and this community. So thank you. Thank you. Dramaine, my relationship with Dramaine is about a year old. So we just connected and had one of those moments. And he is an educator that just got his PhD. You'll hear a little bit more about what he wants to do. His family's in the back watching, not to put any extra pressure. But incredible guy, and look forward to partnering with him and doing the thing together to, help people in general of our communities. So, and with that, I will pass to Lynette.
I'm going to frame the intros quickly and focus on the me and why I brought them to the we here. So Stefanie in front of me, we met in the playground. Our kids go to the same school, and we had no idea what each other did when we weren't in the playground until a few months ago. And I started to learn that she creates community and holds space in communities from caretaker groups. She'll tell you more. And she does a lot of work in her day job and her passion work that really ties to what we're doing here. So I'm excited to have her here. And Chris, I also knew Chris recently. I've been working with Asana, where he works, for 4 years. I've been coaching leaders there. And I remember one of the first people I coached was really having anxiety about having a difficult conversation. And they pulled out this worksheet called a conscious leadership worksheet for dialogue around how to talk above and below the line and the story she tells herself before to prepare for the dialogue that she was going to have with this person. And 4 years later, I find out there's somebody at Asana who has this dream job called Program Manager for Conscious Leadership, and that is Chris. And so, Chris, already a couple people said, how do you get a job like that while we're here? So you might want to give some insight. So that is Chris. And with that, I will hand it to Stefanie to introduce herself. Over to you.
Oh, actually, I'll use this. Oh, can I use this one? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Lynette. So just a few words from me before we get started in this conversation. I'm so thrilled to be invited here and be among all of you over these last couple of days. It's truly been a journey, and more so honored to be here facilitating this conversation as a way to not just hold space for diverse perspectives as we launch from theory to practice, in this work that we're doing here at the conference, but also to facilitate and understand how we as leaders in the room that came here and are here, showing up to bring the learning back into our own worlds and our own environments. So at the fishbowl, we will hold this conversation. It's a way of practicing so many things we've been talking about. The dialogue that Sue took us through yesterday, Erin's presentation yesterday about operationalizing and systematizing the work. We're moving here, and it's really a culminating opportunity to do so. And most recently, the yes and of ZipT, and really being able to hold the space for where we are now, current state in our organizations as it relates to conscious leadership, and where we need to continue to go, right? So it's really the essence of the andness that these individuals will bring to this conversation, that we'll hold, as well as you all weighing into that as well, which will lead us into the breakouts beyond that. With that, I would love to first start with introductions by all of you to share a bit about who you are and where you work. What is the work that you do and bring? So just a couple minutes for each of you.
Yeah, all right, I'll start. Well, it's wonderful to see everyone here. It's wonderful to see everyone here online. As Joel, my name is Greg Pryor. I've actually been coming, believe it or not, for on and off for 40 years to this conference. And I know that's a lot. You're like, how? Wait, he's old, but he's not that old. But I came as a child. So for your son in the back who was flying that cool drone earlier, maybe he'll be coming for 40 years, hopefully as well. Just maybe three, other than a husband and dad of two daughters who are here. One is a brand new nurse and a brand new teacher. Super proud of their aspirations and what they're going to do for our communities. Maybe just 3 points of context from a work perspective. I recently retired from Workday. I was a very early employee at Workday and helped the company from about 2,000 to about 20,000 folks there. And my role was a people and performance evangelist, which was always integral to get people going on that. What do you mean by an evangelist at an organization? I also am a founder of what's known as the Connected Commons. We're a research consortium on social network science, understanding how people connect, organizational network analysis. Anna mentioned my partner, Rob Cross, yesterday as some of that work. And then third, just quick point is I am been invited by PsyOp to curate their new book on social networks and understanding the practical application of social networks at work. So super excited about we. I am a big believer that we need to add the social capital lens to the heritage human capital lens to address the type of wicked problems, to address the way we collaborate today.
Thank you. Dramaine?
Good afternoon. I'm Dramaine Freeman. Someone told me yesterday to make sure I say Dr. Dramaine Freeman. So I am a husband and a father of two boys. One is 7, is in the back. One is 15, about to be 16. You can imagine our household. I am a former educator, public educator. I was a principal for the last 3 years of my education. Started education in 2001 as a math teacher. Moved into a career development coordinator. Moved into a community college math teacher, moved into AP, and then into principalship. I recently, as mentioned earlier, finished my doctorate at Appalachian State University, where there I received 3 degrees total, school administration, EDS, and also a doctorate as well. My doctorate is actually in ed leadership. And so the primary focus of my doctorate focused on looking at the social impact on influences on Black men in society and how it impact Black male leaders in K-12 spaces. From there, I have recently started an organization that's not even a month old yet, called Bros Beyond Bounds, with 3 primary focuses. One focus is on increasing Black male representation across different career sectors. The other is increasing across leadership. And then the third is about increasing academic attainment, making sure that Black males get doctorates. One of my partners is Dr. Jesse Ford, who is a professor out of UNCG. His work, along with hiring Black men, and my work with K-12 and Black men, is how we teamed up to start this organization. So that's the primary work of who I am. That's my passion job. My job during the day, using that type of language, is I'm a doctoral student advisor for Appalachian State University as well. This is my not even the first year into that yet. Started that in last August. So it's been a good journey, and I'm looking forward to this conversation on today.
Thank you so much. We met Shanna earlier, but we'd like to share a little bit.
Dr. Dramaine, I feel like I need to ask you to be on my personal board of directors. Very excited. Okay, so hi again, everyone. Shanna, Smiley, and I know I serve. I share that I serve as a director of multicultural leadership for the National YMCA, but I didn't get to tell any personal things, so I'm excited about that. So I actually went to Purdue University to be an astronaut. Aerospace engineering was my pursuit, and I learned that you have to have 20/20 vision to go into space, and I wore contacts. So I had to change my major. I did my internship at Walt Disney World Orlando and got my doctorate degree there. You can get a master's or a doctorate degree in that program, and learned a lot about DEI and leadership development. And so that's when I changed the trajectory of my career, moved into Starbucks coffee, marketing in the department of that for the country, and then through that work was asked to serve on the board for the YMCA of Greater Indianapolis. So I started my career with the Y as a board volunteer for 2.5 years, advocating for DEI and representation. And I kind of moved my way up through that local YMCA association to joining the national Y. And in my role now, I support all 780 YMCA associations across the country. I'm probably on an airplane every other week, visiting and connecting and training and developing staff all across the country, staff and volunteers, with the ultimate goal of achieving racial representation at all levels of leadership throughout this organization, a goal that we hope to see in our lifetime, and partnering with organizations inside and outside of our communities and in our YMCAs, our HBCUs, and a lot of our college and universities to build a pipeline of leaders coming into the Y and those who move throughout the Y into their community. So I'm absolutely passionate about this work and excited to be here with you all today.
So much, and I really just want to acknowledge the and-ness of all of your bios. How many different parts of you that you bring to the table. Chris?
We can't hear anything.
Yeah, your mic was a little bit quiet, Stefanie.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'll put it a little bit.
Yeah, and it's great to be able to have this conversation. I often don't people I can have a conversation like this with without being accused of being extremely nerdy. So it seems like a real luxury to be amongst us today. My name's Chris Gray. I work at a software company. I'm out here in San Francisco now. Some company's called Asana, and I head up the Conscious Leadership program here at the organization. I've been doing work around relational leadership for the last 5 or 6 years, workshops for the public, teams, different organizations, and also taking this work into prisons and for people who are recently out of being in prison for a long time. And I'm always moved at how, no matter what the context, there's something about the essence of this work that like contextual, and it's always very moving to me. If you really knew me, you'd know that I have suffered a lot in my career, and 99% of it was self-inflicted. My background's in product management. I've been in tech my career. I spent some time working at Meta and a bunch of other tech companies out here, and I never really had a problem with product management or the job, but any type of issues I had in my career were really about how I was being with other people. And, I learned the hard way and had to really grow through this. So, what lights me up most these days is supporting people with suffering less so we could show up more for what we care about with each other and at work. And that's what I do here at Asana. And I feel very fortunate to be able to get this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chris. Okay. We're going to move into the dialogue, the conversation. And to kick us off, we'll start in a visioning state and a place of imagination, and in bringing in the themes and trends of the last couple days. I'll pose 2 questions, so you can answer one or both, or just weave them together in that way. The first is, what is noteworthy and needs integrating that we've been talking about over the last couple of days as it relates to conscious leadership in organizations. And in a couple of sentences, what does a conscious organization look like?
Heck.
What have you heard over the last couple of days that is noteworthy and needs integrating? And what does a conscious organization look like in an imaginative state?
I feel the least positioned to answer this question, so maybe I'll start us, get us rolling, and then we'll get to some really much smarter answers. I would say one of the things that really struck me from yesterday, I really appreciated Anna's conversation on the impact of AI. And I would say one of the things that we will be definitely grappling with is this idea of responsible AI. I've done some work in this space historically, and I think from my personal perspective, I really appreciated, where she was saying the world is likely going. My experience is the world is already very much there. I personally, with a bunch of colleagues, have already created an AI-based coach based on the content we've had. And so I do believe that we're going to see much more of an impact, especially on those people who may have been more marginalized in the past as roles begin to become automated and augmented with AI. So I think we all have a tremendous responsibility to society as a whole to think about that. So that was one of the many things that struck me, but probably a pretty profound for me personally, that as we think about society as a whole, as we think about our collective, as we move from a me to a we environment, I think we'll all be grappling and taking leadership responsibilities in this particular topic.
So for me, the first session, when we talked about the dialogue, particularly around, I wrote down in my notes, breathe in the silence. And so for my work, started reflecting heavily on the work I did with my dissertation, where I interviewed 15 participants, all Black men in leadership roles. And they all shared, it was amazing for them to have the opportunity to talk. So when I heard the language of breathe in the silence, I started thinking about how many other Black men there are silenced. They haven't had the opportunity to breathe in enough to share what's happened with them mentally, emotionally, in their leadership roles, or even they thrive to get to the top wherever they want to get to. So that was pretty impactful for me. I've been thinking a lot about how I create the space for that to happen more often as I encounter other Black men, which led me to think about organizationally, when we see our employees or our workers being quiet, what are they truly saying that we're not having them verbally say out loud? And so I started thinking about the tortoise and the hare. I'm an analogy type person, and just thinking about what the tortoise must have done in terms of observing the world as he's continuing to progress towards the finish line, so he didn't miss anything, while the hare just flew through and missed everything. So organization, I think we need to look into how do we slow down enough to see, but be more efficiently in our process so that we can meet the goals that we're trying to meet.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Dramaine. I don't know if it's the context that we can comment or converse, or are we going around? What's the flow here?
I think let's keep it organic. So feel free to jump in, Chris.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Dramaine. I was really moved by what you were calling out around this idea of space and slow, and also, like, I'm in this context right now where it's about let's get it done, let's execute, let's deliver, let's meet the goals. So there's this inherent tension here of go fast, execute, and then where is there space for our humaning to occur? What's being lost without that space? How am I not creating and evoking space? And there's almost this tension, like if we slow down, we then won't succeed. It's like kind of like a trade-off. And what I've really found is that a little bit of slow can go a long way. Sometimes it's like I had this idea in my head that we need to be at a Buddhist retreat sort of thing, but it's almost like a drop of slow. A drop of slowdown seems to create a little bit more space. And, kind of the way I see it here oftentimes is like when I'm like fast is protection, slow is connection. And we can get into this fast way where we don't really have to be with some of the discomfort. So it's such an interesting, what would you call, polarity to kind of live into with the stakes, at least, speaking from my arena here. I appreciated that. Thanks, Dramaine.
I wasn't here yesterday, and so I didn't get to experience a lot of the dialogue and conversation. I've heard a lot and got to connect with some folks one-on-one, and even hearing some things at the table here today. I'm excited to hear more about the AI piece because we do a lot of partnership with the Institute for the Future and what those conversations are looking like. So, but I do want to comment on the second part of your question, Stefanie, which was, what does a conscious organization look like? And so what I would say would be key for any organization that's aiming to carry the title or the mantle of being conscious. It really starts with the willingness to be vulnerable and to be honest about where we are as an organization and the state of our reality today. Most organizations struggle with that because we have this lens in society of perfection and having to look and appear as perfection. And that's not going to get us where we need to get. We're not going to move the needle in the way that we need to if we don't start with vulnerability and honest authenticity of what that means for us. And so being able to say, through honest dialogue and feedback within our internal stakeholders, as well as our external ones, our community, our partners, our consumers, our members, where are we? How do you see us? How do you view us? How do you experience us? And then recognizing through those assessments, this is the work we have to do in that space, and being honest with ourselves and being transparent and being vocal, sharing it out loud and owning that. And there are some organizations we see doing that today. There are a lot of organizations out there we don't see doing that today. And you talked about silence and what is being said when someone is being silent. I think silence can be the loudest thing sometimes. It is very vocal if you really pay attention to what is happening in that silence. And so when we talk about conscious organizations, it really is about vulnerability and transparency and the willingness to recognize where our starting point is. We all have different ones, but recognizing where that is and then taking the steps forward on that journey and then staying true to that journey and not being distracted or disrupted or giving up when it gets hard or uncomfortable. And we talked about that this morning, right? You got to be willing to get uncomfortable to see the growth you want to see.
Thank you so much. I'll add just a couple things if you don't mind. What's coming up for me is one of the quotes we read yesterday about the jobs of the past, or the muscle, today the brain, tomorrow the heart, and so much emphasis on heart work, and vulnerability and love and these types of concepts that will lead us into the future in a way that is unknown. And how do we do that really in a way that allows people to show up in that way? I often come to these types of retreats or conferences that are around a lot of like-minded people. And when I go back into
But I think this notion of humility, talked about it as sort of that honesty, that sense of really appreciating that, gosh, there's so much we don't know. Have certainty to keep us, together, but realizing that there's so much we don't know. And I hope that the pandemic taught us a little bit of that. Hey, we all would have bet that was probably not, maybe a few people had that in the possible predictions of the future, but like the world is a lot more uncertain than we know. And so having that openness, keeping the aperture open, being part of discovery communities where we can learn from others and say, gosh, there's so much we don't know. I think conscious organizations have that sense of humility as a value and lean into learning versus knowing, perhaps.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, both. There's something about humility and vulnerability. You know, it seems like an organization. What's a conscious organization? And then within it, there's a bunch of individuals. And the individuals are showing up each day of worried about the job stability, under a lot of pressure to get things done, and also having entire lives to deal with. So like in the crucible of the actual get things done, it's there's something special about creating space for people who might be earlier in their consciousness journey, within a larger company, having some people who are further along being able to offer grace and understanding and some of the deep listening that we've talked about in this seminar already for the folks who are maybe this notion of awareness and consciousness and impact. So grace, I might add, to an ingredient within a conscious organization, grace and patience with each other.
I would add to that, Chris, something that Mark talked about yesterday in one of his stories, along with the person who tried to commit suicide and the manager struggling to decide which way to go. I think conscious organizations need to keep in mind that these are human beings who need to be cared for. And oftentimes, I want to say have to be fearless, because the struggle that the manager that was being described by Mark, wasn't that he didn't care about the person that jumped off the ledge to commit suicide. He was worried about the policies that was getting in the way if he actually cared beyond what's supposed to happen. So I would say conscious organizations have to also be fearless, and then also keep in mind that these are human beings. So care for the person that is working, as you just mentioned, Chris, coming in every day with a whole lot of other concerns behind them, in addition to getting the task done that needs to be done for their organization.
Can I add? I'm going to add to it, and not to challenge you, but just to ask us to consider the language of fearlessness instead of using that term to choose brave. Because the reality is fear will always be there. And when we try to attain fearlessness, you're trying to attain something that's almost impossible, and then it becomes defeated, and then you give up and move on. Brave says, we know and recognize fear is there, and I'm still willing to move towards it. And that's where we as organizations need to be intentional of being brave. We know fear is there. We have insecurity, we have worry, we have doubt, we have VUCA, right? The volatile uncertainty of the climate of the world today. But when an organization chooses to be brave, when they can, really lean in and help their staff understand the characteristic of courage, then you're willing to face the fear and recognizing that it's there. So I absolutely agree with you, but then we can get hung up and then we end up canceling our efforts out when we try to put terms to it that are impossible to achieve. I got you.
Do we have any? It reminds me of the drone as well, or rising above.
Yeah.
Right, the mud. Okay, I'm going to take us into the current state now, moving away from visioning and moving into what conscious leadership challenges are we facing right now? What are we in our own environments and organizations, and what and how are they being addressed or not? So I'll share again. What is a conscious leadership challenge that exists right now in your space environment? And how is that being addressed or not? Right. So exposing what we're facing and dealing with, and what are those gaps or potential solutions.
I'm happy to get us started, since this is kind of what I'm in the middle of, literally, right now. For us, I'd say there are two big challenges, and one supports the other. The first one is how to scale consciousness, how to scale a culture of conscious leadership, going from a company that's 12 people in a room to 400 to 1,000 to 2,000 and then even beyond. And I know, Greg, you've worked with Workday, which is quite a big company. I'm imagining this is something that you thought about a lot. So this idea of, how can we create supports or reminders or be intentional about an environment that is filled with small behaviors that indicate these values of presence, of choice, of ownership. One of the ways we've been addressing this is, one on a programmatic standpoint, we create a conscious leadership curriculum and invest. So all new hires go through this program, and then we have practice over time, the first 6 months. So there's a way we programmatically work to create this environment. And then another thing that's proven, it seems small, but it may seem small, but it's actually pretty powerful, is that we have a shared vocabulary across the company for shorthand moves around conscious leadership. So one is, I've heard it discussed already, is above the line, below the line. And so in our day-to-day, you'll hear people admit that they're below the line to a group, which, towards what Shanna was saying, in my world, that's vulnerability. That's saying, I'm actually threatened right now. And I just want to let you know I'm threatened, and that may be impacting what's happening. So there's these common shorthand words that we all share that have helped keep it alive. And each one of these is like a little meditation bell, which is like, oh yeah, there is a present moment. I'm here. Oh, wow, there's other humans in this room with me. Oh, okay. So scaling is one thing we've been working on and continually trying to dial in. The other big problem for us is navigating change. So the scaling supports that. And I'll just pause there because I could talk more about the change thing later if anyone has any interest, but I'd love to hear from my colleagues about what's coming up for you.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris, I definitely want to talk about change. So let's do that later. It's one of my favorite things, systems change. And something we're talking a lot about right now in terms of barriers or what could be preventing conscious leadership is this kind of evolution of what work has been in our reality. And so we're kind of, especially in the context of the US, we're moving from this kind of industrial work approach where everything that we did, everything that organizations did was visible, was in the light, and very transactional. You're going to do this, you're going to have these returns, you're going to have these results, you're going to have this revenue. This is the ROI, right? It's like the favorite thing for organizations to say because it's visible and we can see it and it's achievable. And when you talk about conscious leadership and conscious organizations, that is work in the dark. That is work in spaces that you can't see. You don't know what's there. You might be alone when you embark in that direction, and it can feel isolating and it can feel fearful. And when we talked about earlier what it means, minimization, this lens of minimization speaks about staying comfortable. Let's not talk about the things that are uncomfortable. Let's not rock the boat. There's a great book called Who Rocked the Boat that a lot of organizations are using right now that talks about changing our approach and our work and our approach towards leadership. But it speaks to where most organizations want to stay comfortable. They want to stay in the light where they can see everything, where it's easy, where it's visible. But to become a conscious organization, you have to be willing to say, okay, I'm standing on a cliff looking over an abyss, and across the other side of the abyss is the cliff I want to be at. That's the cliff of equity. That's the cliff of parity. That's what we want to get to. But to get there, I have to be willing to go down off this cliff into this dark space and hope that I can find my way through it. And most organizations would rather say, no, thank you. I'm good. I'm going to stay over here. Or they'll wait to see what happens to another organization that goes, let's watch them fail. Let's watch them try it out. And so we talk about this evolution of moving from working in the light to being willing and courageous enough to embark on a journey into the dark, recognizing trust will be key. And we live in a reality that's very polarized, and trust is not very popular right now in any of our spaces, personally and professionally, across organizations, across households and communities. But you have to be willing to trust whoever is willing to take that first step into the dark, and then identify some tools that are going to help you navigate through it. You know, what are your flashlights? What are the spaces and places where you can move through to find your way to the other side? Because when you get to the other side and you reach the other cliff, that's the goal that you really want to achieve. And recognizing there doesn't have to be ROI along that journey because you're moving in the direction towards change. And I think that's something we have to recognize in the current climate of the world today, our willingness to get out of the light and move into the dark in order to achieve what's on the other side.
So maybe I'll give a super practical example. Hopefully I'm not going too far down into the weeds here, but I think just to keep things, also on the balance, I'm channeling a bit of the work of my good friend Karen Taylor. Karen is as she refers to, I think now in LinkedIn as the unapologetic head of DE&I for Workday. And if you know Karen, that's a brilliant way to think about the way she approaches the world. Karen, when coming to Workday, introduced the idea of vibe, which is how do we value inclusion, belonging, and equity. And so she had the vibe. How do we vibe, and how do we vibe for all? And getting a little geeky and intentional, as Chris had talked about, one of the things we created in this spirit of moving from goal setting to goal getting was something called the Vibe Index. And the Vibe Index used a sort of intersectionality idea, took a whole variety of metrics. As you can imagine, a human capital management technology company, we had more human capital metrics than you could imagine, and then looked across various diverse context. And so think about a big dashboard or big index that has, as an example, Asian American women, and what is the promotion velocity? How much people are giving feedback? What is people's experience in feeling a sense of inclusion? And we actually created an index that looked at anything that was statistically significant and where one group did not feel or was not having an experience that was as strong as the strongest group, whatever group that was. And I would say that this gave us the ability from a consciousness perspective to do two things: to have the awareness, this was people's experience on a dashboard as an example, and to also do the right thing, to know that we wanted people to have a similar experience, to not have promotion velocity. And so to get even more specific, we discovered that specifically Asian American women, when answering the Feedback Friday poll, were feeling that they didn't have the same productive connections as Caucasian males, as an example. Materially off, like 22% difference in how people felt about their connections at work. And so looking at that cell light up, we were able to double click and engage in appreciative inquiry and say, why is it that this is your experience? What can we learn from that particular cell, lighting up? We also looked and we found that for whatever reason, Asian American women were not giving the same amount of feedback to colleagues using Workday's anytime feedback capability. I mean, materially different for whatever reason. And so what we actually did in that little cell was to deploy a piece of learning to say, did you know that when people use anytime feedback in Workday, that when people connect and celebrate each other, they have a greater sense of engagement. They feel a greater contribution to the organization. They're more likely to stay, and they're perceived as higher performing because they have developed a network. They've shared their gratitude for the work that they've done. And we were able to then, by sharing that very specific piece of knowledge, see a dramatic increase. And then it was followed up with, if you'd like to give anytime feedback to a colleague, here's a way to do that. And we saw in actually 2 quarters, the sense of feeling a sense of connection from those people who just took that one piece of maybe feedback. Many others thought, hey, maybe that's not for me, and that's cool as well. But to be really, really specific about how actionably you can help someone identify. And it was very powerful in the organization in that transparency, that sense of our goal is to have, create a similar experience where all can celebrate your equity versus equalness comment earlier. And I just give you that as an example of being able to be transparent, to show, to be able to say, what does it look like when people are able to have to be able to value inclusion, belonging, and equity for all. And then the organization to take responsibility to say, when there's a deviation, it's our responsibility to at least understand very deeply and then to take action. That for me, struck as maybe one example of how an organization can practice that sense of conscious leadership and then measure those results. And if we're not seeing the results, then we got to go back to square one and understand more, engage in that appreciative inquiry. It was a hamster wheel. There was always a cell lit up as an opportunity for improvement, but that was the reality. That was the transparency. That was the honesty of, this is how people are feeling. It's our responsibility to do what we can to lift people up, especially if they're silent. I loved your earlier comments on, just because people are not saying things, that doesn't mean we ignore or we hope it's all well. And having that transparency was really cool in the context of at least this little project. Oh, Karen's brilliant. She's.
So let's see, I'm gonna be a little brave and shed a little light on from the education sector. When COVID came, I saw the term now conscious leadership happen a lot, from superintendents across the nation, principals down. We saw a lot of thought around how to take care of the teachers that are working, the students that are now at home without resources and devices and food and access. And a lot of work went into making sure that everyone was taken care of. And it was a beautiful thing to see. From delivering of foods, you name it, we saw news reports across CNN and all the other networks. I was thinking, Chris, when you asked about scaling, and I was thinking about my experience as a principal during COVID times. It began to shift though, when we tried to do more. So the initial response that you saw from many educators became natural. It was a natural thing to do. We see a kid, we know that kids weren't getting lunches because of just some stipulations. So it was natural to go and try to give them food, for example. But when I noticed the district began to put goals in place to deliver that food, it became not as natural. And you begin to fade away. So then you fast forward up until now, maybe last year, we started hearing language around, because let me go back. There was really a focus on equity in that place and inclusion and diversity, making sure that our online spaces had all those moments. But fast forward now, a year or two later, we began to get emails and messages of saying, don't talk about equity and diversity in your spaces of education. Just recently, I had to participate in a activity of removing some course language because it had the word equity and diversity in the course name. So the conscious leader began to shift and fade away because there began more parameters around trying to meet these goals. So I often wonder, just like you, Chris, how do we scale it in a way that remains authentic to the person, to human beings, particularly when you're dealing with public service like schooling of kids, where they're coming in with so many different barriers to carry. And we want to make sure we remain conscious about what's happening in their lives while potentially not meeting the goals that we've set for EOGs and EOCs in a course, in a grade. For those who are not familiar with that type of language, because we do push very, very hard for them to meet those goals. But when you start putting the pressure on meeting those goals versus not serving the food they need, not providing housing they need, not taking care of your students that are homeless, when you start focusing more on those EOG, EOC goals, the conscious leadership, unfortunately, goes out the window. And I'll be brave enough to say in this particular space that unfortunately in education, it's probably less conscious leadership in the business of serving students than it is in any corporate space. And that's a sad statement to make, as an educator has been a part of that since 2001, and a student, and a child rather, of educators as well.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. This is a good time. We're gonna open it up now for our audience and all of you online. Just an instruction here. We have 3 questions to pose that you can ask, and through the WhatsApp group, there is the QR code, right? Up, great. So if you're not a part of the WhatsApp group, you can QR code in. So we want to open it up here. 3 prompts. What are you hearing that's aligns with what you're witnessing? What challenges your perspectives? And what questions do you have? So what are you hearing that aligns with what you're witnessing? Right, what challenges your perspectives and what questions do you have? So go ahead and enter those into the WhatsApp group. I'll read them out for our participants, our fish, and we'll continue the conversation.
Sam.
All right, all right.
Is that
I
what's up
can,
there?
That QR
that-
code,
that is not the
that's
WhatsApp, that's the chat
okay.
and Zoom. It's here, so I
Okay,
can
I
leave
can
it
try
open
this.
for
Okay.
both of us if you want. There's no questions in yet, just people joining. So we'll give it a minute.
It's interesting what you shared about the schoolings because I'm in Florida and our governor just passed legislation removing all DEI language and curriculum from the schools. And it's been interesting to see the schools that are just saying, okay, and then the schools are like, absolutely not, and fighting it, taking it to, to courts about it and trying to do the right thing, the courage piece.
What is the rationale for removing that?
Uh,
That is just,
Governor DeSantis in Florida feels strongly that anything that has to do with DEI is critical race theory and is harming
I didn't know
students,
that.
harming youth. So he's been very vocal. He removed, he cut federal funding for all of the YMCs in the state of Florida because they said our youth development programs, we were doing equity work with our teen programming, and he said that was brainwashing. And so they cut federal funding for the state. And Texas is doing the same. Tennessee is doing it. So it's very interesting. Some of the states where,
well, it must be too from the perspective of the Y based in Florida.
yeah,
I'm gonna move to our questions. Okay, is everyone ready to continue onward, or do we need a quick stretch? Quick stretch? Want to do a joint stretch? Okay, let's stretch. Poor Chris.
Not to move, I'm gonna take out the power system.
This, exactly. Although I hear they're changing the rules of baseball as well. So make it more, they're changing the rules in baseball, right? To make it more fun for fans, like more engaging.
Same thing, football.
Is that right? Yeah. We do have a lot of good questions. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and move onward. But take your time getting back to your seat. Take your time, but hurry up. Love it. All right, let me just look through these. I'm gonna start of love. Okay, we've got a lot of good questions. Do you want to take a quick stroll through them if you all, can you see them as well?
Yeah.
If you want to start with anyone.
See, there's a question from Catherine Bittner on corporations and education and people who think conscious leadership is BS. How do you deal with serious pushback? Seems interesting.
Do you want to speak to that, Chris?
Yeah, I like the question because it seems to validate my daily perceptions of working with a lot of different people in a lot of different places. And like for me, there's never not a moment where I can practice conscious leadership. And I think my first approach with people who think it's BS is to welcome their resistance and to get curious about why they think it's BS. And what I find is if I welcome resistance and don't make people wrong, like as if conscious leadership is right. And if you're not down with conscious leadership, you're wrong. And I'm just exhibiting my same damning different groups. So like what speaks to me the most about that is, can I make someone right and get curious about where they're at? And just in the process of listening to people and not attempting to have them change, ironically, people tend to soften. So that's been the biggest thing I've seen. Meet and welcome people where they're at. And through the welcoming, it creates a new experience for them. I imagine that they haven't often been welcomed.
Thanks, Chris. I think building off of that, there's a few questions in there that speak to how to take those first steps in encouraging those that are less conscious or maybe aren't on a path yet, as well as this trend of love that we've talked a lot about. So I'd love to pose that to build off of. How do we, as the conscious leaders of the future, ignite that or encourage or introduce?
One thing that I've seen work very well, and I absolutely agree with you, Chris. You can't tell someone, "No, I'm right and you're wrong." You'll never get to where you want to get in that effort. But what I have seen work really well is asking individuals who are pushing back, can you explain why? Can you share why? Can you help me understand why? Help me understand where you're coming from or your perspective. Often people push back just because they want to push back and they don't have real understanding or reasoning why, or they can't explain it. And when you start to challenge individuals to think about that, to go deeper on not just the pushback itself, but the why behind it, then they start to reflect on the fact that they don't know why. It's just a core value or belief that they've had or they've carried, a bias that they've picked up along the way in their life experience, or one particular interaction that they've had that has colored or shaped their view on a particular uh, experience or scope of work moving forward. And so I would invite individuals to say, I hear you and I welcome you, and I'm not here to say you're wrong. Can you help me understand why? What's the why behind it? And when you start to help and invite people into those conversations, they start to reflect more deeply on it themselves, of wanting to do the work to understand why they feel the way that they feel. And when you invite someone into that journey, then they tend to move in a direction of growth and learning on their own, and not because you told them to or not because you challenged them on their belief, but because they did the exploration on their own. And usually if you ask someone why and their response is, well, just because, that's just because, that's because, then they start to hear themselves, and often in the willingness to say, I'm willing to learn more about it, can you help me understand? Then they start to explore at a deeper level, and they reach some conclusions that they may have not have reached otherwise if you had pushed back. So I would invite you and any of us in the room that when you find yourself experiencing and receiving pushback, and you'll continue to experience that. I live in the state of Florida. It's happening on a daily basis. But when you start to invite people into the conversation to say, okay, I hear where you're coming from. Can you help me understand the why behind it? Most of the time they don't have an answer. And And then it challenges them to want to do the exploration on their own to move forward. You know that concept, if you can help people feel like it was their idea, then you can change. You can find change happen for the both of you. So that's something that I've seen work very well in organizations, having these conversations or embarking on these journeys right now. And then really starting to dig deep into the individual piece. So Chris, you said it very loudly earlier that all organizations are made up of people. And all those people are human beings with their own levels of experiences and biases, and really starting to understand how do you peel that back and recognize, why isn't our organization willing to make a statement on this thing? Why isn't our organization willing to take a stance on this topic or issue, and really starting to peel back at the people level to unpack who's making those decisions and the why behind that, and how that why is aligning with our core values and mission of the organization. So oftentimes pushback is shrouded and buried in fear and security, or the scarcity model. We talked about the scarcity model earlier. For me to make space at the table for you may mean I have to give up my seat at the table, which isn't true. But a lot of people in organizations today believe that, because of that's what society has taught us and conditioned us to believe. So it really is inviting people into the conversation of learning together and understanding together, and saying, I hear your perspective. How can we learn together, and help me understand where you're coming from? Because you're gonna run out of breath trying to convey where you are trying to convince them. You're gonna run out of energy, probably lose that battle. But if you invite them in to explain their perspective and their vantage point with you, then you may see some movement in that space that you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question, we have a couple questions in here around the systems and processes of conscious leadership, and really both the dismantling and rebuilding of that. So I'd love to pose that to the group. What do you think? How can we start to both nurture the ground for breaking down and rebuilding from a process, systems, program perspective?
So I'll maybe offer a slightly maybe offbeat idea, again, back to some of the thoughts on how to sort of think about it. I feel sometimes like we position these ideas that they're in opposition to other ideas, as opposed to, so I'll give you a quick story. We talked about Disney World earlier. A good friend of mine, for those of you who know Peter Bragman, Peter's quite a character. Peter and I were colleagues many years ago. If you don't know Peter, Peter's super character. He talked about that he was on the safari ride at Disney World, and they were going through, and he came up on Pride Rock or Pride Mountain, and the safari person said, "What a wonderful day. There's Simba on the top of Pride Rock. I've taken this trip so many times and I've never seen Simba. We are such a lucky group." And Peter has a childlike imagination, if you know him. And he was immediately captured by this idea of how often is that lion on the rock? This is a real lion on the rock. And so he stalked this poor cast member, Disney cast member, literally off the bus, back into the cast member entrance only, where he was not supposed to go. And he finally broke this cast member down to a place where Peter was like, "How often is that lion there?" And the cast member said, "The lion is always there." And that even blew his mind even more. How do you get the lion? How do you train the lion to get on that spot on the rock? And he said, the cast member said, "You don't train a lion to sit on a spot on the rock. You don't do that. What we do is, on hot days, we air condition that part of the rock. And on cold days, we heat that part of the rock. And so the lion just loves being on that part of the rock. We create the conditions where that's where the lion wants to be. It just happens to be the perfect spot for us as that bus, comes around." And so I just love Peter's story. So I've, from a change management perspective, I'm a recovering change management consultant. This idea of finding the hot spot on the rock, creating the hot spot on, I think, to a lot of the comments, what we know from a neurological sense is we actually do think about people. We want to be drawn, most of us, to doing the right thing. I would offer, maybe as an idea, of finding those places where these ideas make sense in the context of well-being and wellness. You want a resilient, you want people to feel engaged and committed. I might just suggest finding those places that make sense to those people who may be a little bit more business or commercially oriented, and position this good work my experience is when it's positioned in the context of a hot spot on the rock, people actually are very comfortable going there. We know neurologically that we care about each other. If you're unfamiliar yet with Matt Lieberman at UCLA wrote a wonderful book called Social, which says when our brains are at rest, we actually think about other people. What enabled our species to evolve was collective intelligence, the ability to know Dunbar's number up to 150 people that we collectively, and by the way, the other thing we know about collective intelligence is the more women that are included, the smarter we are because of turn taking, because of people inviting each other. All the women are like, duh. Matt had to do work on research using fMRIs to figure that out. But again, my experience has been when we approach it from what makes sense, creating a hot spot on the rock and enter these conversations. It's not combative, not this is what you have to do. But my experience has been framing these things in sense making. These ideas, I believe, for most people, not everyone, but for most people, generally make sense. So it just struck me in some of the comments of it's not a us versus them. It's a me to a we. Where can we collectively benefit from these, really important ideas where people are committed, where people are engaged, where people share ideas and have their voices heard? Just random thoughts.
It is. It reminds me of the flower quote that was shared yesterday about when a flower is wilting, you don't change the flower, you change the environment. Yeah, so much can be said in a quote. I'm going to offer one more question and then I'll take us home to wrap this up. This last question I thought was really interesting to kind of broaden our scope a little bit about conscious leadership looking different around the world in different cultures. Just to speak to some of those conversations earlier, it's not a one size fits all model. So, knowing that core tenets are the same, what do we all think about that concept and how to learn from multicultural environments to bring that into our organizations in that way?
I would probably say the core of conscious leadership across the world has to begin with love. I once heard someone say, we know what love does not look like, so we can do the opposite of that in a way. So I say that to say that I think if we consider how we love one another and how we love ourselves, that would be the foundation of conscious leadership. And that doesn't matter where you're located across the world, that love seems to have this amazing power to heal wounds that nothing else can seem to heal, and increase vulnerability in ways that nothing else seems to be able to increase vulnerability with.
I think we can end there. Thank you. Do you have anything else? Welcome. All right, let's take us home. So we'll move into part 2 of this conversation that will sow the seeds for our mapping exercise right after this, and that's the future state. So we talked a little bit about the vision. We talked about the current state, where we are, the challenges we're facing, what is working, what is not, or what is missing. And now we'll talk about our needs and our supports that we can lean into to reach that potential. So that's what I'll pose here to the group to take us home. What does your organization need to reach that potential and lead with conscious leadership? And what supports do we need in place? What does your organization need to lead with conscious leadership? And what supports do we need in place?
I'm happy to speak a little to get us going on that one. To be honest, I'm still back with the question around culture that Dramaine was speaking to. If I could, I would say on that culture question, like, I'm so in a Western capitalist mindset that I don't even know I'm in it. And so I work with colleagues from all over the world, and clearly they experience things differently. And I think I would start by asking them, how would you define conscious leadership? Does that even make sense in your culture? Would you, if you were to adopt it this way, would you be betraying something that's a value in your culture? So I think I would really start with curiosity rather than thinking I have any earthly idea of what it might be or how it might even serve or not serve. When in terms of the question, when I look ahead at conscious leadership, I think one of my big concerns is the shadow side of like weaponizing conscious leadership, or I'm more conscious than you, or pointing it out to other people, or maybe avoiding dissenting opinions because we want to lean so far towards belonging. Like being, so the adjustment for that, I think, would be willing to admit as a group, as a team, as an organization, that we have shadows, and be open to that, even though these are our best intentions, because we're human beings, we might have motives slipping in because we're human beings and we have nervous systems, and would be vulnerable enough to admit that, one, yeah, we do have shadows, and two, can we make it safe to explore what the shadows might be in service for including even more? So that's the thing that I've been tracking going forward.
I mentioned earlier that we partner with the Institute for the Future, and that we did that as an organization to expand our lens as futurist thinkers and really thinking about where we want to see our organization in the future and applying something called future back thinking. So if I want to see the why at this state 10 years from now, then what do I need to do today? Thinking back to this moment, what do I need to start doing today and the changes I need to make today to achieve that goal 10 years from now? And something that I've learned from an organization called Next Jump, and I think you all should absolutely write it down and Google it. They are fabulous in the people development space out of New York City. They've coined this term called LHF, lying, hiding, faking is what it's called. And what they've discovered through their research is that most people in organizations are doing a second job. And the second job is this LHF, lying, hiding, and faking on a daily basis, which means covering up my weaknesses, managing what other people think of me, their impressions of me, trying to show myself to my best advantages, not being my authentic self, and not being able to feel like I can share my weaknesses or opportunities for improvement because the environment doesn't allow me to do so. And if we want to achieve this future goal of being a truly authentic, conscious organization, then we have to be able to create an environment where people can be their authentic selves wholly, fully, which means there are flaws allowed and welcomed and a part of the reality of our experiences, but that's not the state of the reality for most organizations today. Lying, hiding, and faking is seen as the largest loss of resource for every organization today, because so many people are worrying about the optics or how they're being seen or received or viewed in their roles or in their positions within that organization. And so for us to truly achieve that goal of the conscious organization of the future, our organizations have to create environments that allow and create safe spaces for people to make mistakes, to have flaws, to have weaknesses, to have opportunities to grow and improve, and to be able to be visible and vocal about that in a consistent manner. And so that's what I would advocate for, and recognizing that lying, hiding, and faking exists in every single one of our organizations, and it may even exist for us as individuals. Where do I show up in the LHF space, and how can I be intentional and aware of it so that I can hold myself accountable to shift that and then shift it for others around me as well. And that's how we'll see the change we want to see.
So you talked about hiding your flaws and your mistakes in the workplace, and I just wonder, does this also sort of apply to personal ambition? Because I think in a lot of the dialogue we've had about conscious leadership, it's sort of unspoken, but the idea is that your personal agenda is not as important as the collective purpose of an organization. And I think if we're truly being authentic and honest, that we would honor the fact that we all have things that we want to do for ourselves. And I mean, I think finding a way to harmonize that with a collective uh, effort and in a more conscious way would be advantageous because, like you're saying, having people be authentic about their true nature is a key to, building a more conscious organization going forward. So.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely not saying don't advocate for yourself or don't, speak to the skill set you'd like to see improve, to achieve whatever that next position would be. But when we're in organizations that don't allow us to be honest, to say, I don't have this skill set yet, but I'd like to learn it, I'd like to gain it, and I'd like to have a position that would allow me the space to learn that along the way. We typically don't have that across organizations. Organizations say, well, you need this skill set. And so often people will lie and I have that. And then I get into that position and then I fall on my face because I wasn't honest to say I needed support in this space, in this area to grow because the organization or the environment didn't make me feel safe to say that or to share that. And so when we can get to the point within our organizations and within ourselves as individuals too, and often it starts with one person being willing to say, honestly, this is where I am. And that's a risk, right? We talk about being brave and having courage. That's a risk to say, I really, truly don't have this skill set, but I know that I could learn it if you'd give me the opportunity to do so. But what most happens is people say, oh, I got that. I can do that. Great. And then they fail. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely does make sense. I mean, I think that speaks to ambition as well, because I mean, being able to say, I know I can learn this is something that I would love to have the freedom to say to 100% worked for in the past. So,
well, and it's the same thing Greg said earlier. Our organizations have to be willing to move from what was it, knowing to learning. An organization has to be willing to create the environment that says we don't expect everyone to be a subject matter expertise in every single thing. We want to create an environment where we're going to give you the space to learn it. And we want to own, and whatever your weaknesses are, think about when we do reviews for people, like weaknesses tend to be seen as negative. So, we get demerits or we get written ups for it, or whatever the negative connotation may be. Instead of seeing weaknesses as opportunities to invest in and develop, it's a shift. It's moving from transactional to transformational to get to that future state of conscious leadership.
that's a very futurist perspective on it too. The idea that employees' skills are pliable and malleable, and they should be adapting as things go. So, I mean, you shouldn't know everything that you already need to know because there's way too much information out there moving way too fast. So,
yep, it's actually absolutely what I said earlier. This evolution of organizations where we're moving from the industrial workforce, which really was, we give you a job, you have a task, you have a goal, we measure it, we receive it, we move forward, we measure the ROI on it, and then we start over. It's continuously this cycle. We moving from that evolution today is moving into more of a people development space. And what does that mean for us? The investment in our people and helping them to grow along the way. And that's how we'll get to this state of conscious leadership. But so many organizations today are still operating from that industrial mentality, that mental model that we were talking about earlier. How do we shift it?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I just quickly build on that personally, it's a little bit back to my opening thoughts on the AI. I actually think that, exactly to your point, that capabilities and connections will become the new career currency. That this idea, because jobs will be automated and augmented so much faster than we have ever seen a change, I believe, in sort of an industrial context, that the ability to have exactly what you've described, to have that growth mindset, to be able to have what I would refer to as social agility, the ability to quickly build new relationships in new context, I think this is what actually frightens me the most, is people who don't either have the ability or the context or the environment to keep up with this. It's going to leave people even further behind, which is I actually think threatens democracy even more broadly than it's already threatened. So I love as you think about as I heard your idea of ambition, the ability to say, I'm going to build new skills and capabilities quickly. I'm going to build new connections as quickly as I can. I think that's going to be the new career currency, is the ability to take on a new piece of work, to move to a new role, to be part of a new project. We've already seen, I love the Institute for the Future, by the way. If you're not familiar with Bob Johansson's book out of ITF, strongly recommend New Leadership Literacy. Bob is a brilliant futurist, and he would absolutely, if he were here, suggest that that's the new capability, that having new experiences quickly. And at the same time, I believe what that's going to lean into is essential human capabilities. And so this idea of our social connections, of conscious leadership, of things that only humans can do and machines can't do yet, at least for, I hope, our foreseeable, future, those are the capabilities that are going to become the greatest currency in thinking about careers and contribution. So I personally love your comment and appreciate that. And I think that's a capability, productive, positive ambition to grow capabilities and connections, going to be super crazy important in the next minutes.
Yeah. Tomorrow
Tomorrow
when we organize. All right, I'm going to take us, I'm going to transition us over to Joel now to organize us around our mapping challenge and tomorrow, and in beginning to tackle some of these big questions that we've brought up here as a group and beyond through this board and by way of this conversation. So thank you to all of you as a part of the conversation, and those of you that were a part of it here. I hope that it was fruitful in probing some thinking around these challenges and how we can create the momentum forward.
Everyone can hear me?
I'm always testing technology here. Fantastic fishbowl. Thank you, Stefanie. Thank you, Chris, online. Participants, I've been seeing chats too. I like seeing the interaction out there. I've been enjoying seeing the interaction in the room. Here's what we're going to do. One, I think we all need a little bit of a break. So I am going to provide that, but we're going to do one thing before we go into a break right now. And that is tomorrow at the end of the Leadership Forum Summit, we generally hold up gifts for the provocateurs and say, thank you for what you're doing. Already been one or two that haven't, that have had to leave. And there's a few that won't be here tomorrow too. So we're actually going to hand out some provocateur gifts saying thank you. And we have, a number of people that are here. So, Anne, I'm going to ask you to kind of, I can grab these and read these. Aaron, you were the first one that was on the top of the list here. So, Aaron, come on up here. Thank you, Aaron. She's got to put her shoes back on. She's been getting comfortable. We talk about authentic self. One of my favorite stories of a colleague that came up to facilitate is he facilitated barefoot here. And this is Chuck Paulus from CCL. And so I've seen Chuck facilitate give me a hug first. Hey, I have seen Chuck facilitate in places all over the world, corporate suits and everything. And here Chuck was, and I think he was his best, most authentic facilitator as he was hanging out barefoot, helping us understand the transformations that leaders go through. Fantastic. Sorry, I can speak too much. I got triggered. I don't have my eyes on here. So, Shanna, hey, we're doing the YMCA people first. Shanna, absolute pleasure. Thank you. The Leadership Forum and the YMCA have had a deep 100+ year history. And we really look forward to thinking about how we continue to partner with you, resurrect some of that, because the work the Y does across the country and around the world for those that aren't in this room is profound. As having been a World Service worker in Sri Lanka, I can speak to the on the ground need and impact that the Y has. So thank you and Aaron for being here. Charlie, where are you? Come on up. Yes, you, Charlie. All right, I'm coming to you, Charlie. Stay right there. I'm coming to you. You did a pre-summit, of course, and there's another opportunity tonight for people to connect with you. Thank you so much, Charlie. Yes, storytelling tonight. Stefanie, stand up. You get a hug too. You'll get one later, Charlie. I couldn't lean across the table because we do want to lead with love around here. Sue. Yes, Sue. Oh my God. Dialogue. If we cannot talk to one another, we are screwed. Sorry, I needed to be blunt. Maha. Tomorrow. We get to do this before. Maha. I cannot wait for what you all are bringing us tomorrow. And Brooke, of course, I'm coming back to you. Brooke, thank you. Excellent. Yes. All right. Yeah.
This one is for Joel. Because of the work he's doing today, he volunteered to do the work on the mapping. And so we appreciate Joel.
Thank you. And to the provocateurs that were also a part of the fishbowl and such, thank you all very much. Love each and every one of you, Greg, Dramaine, going with it, and Chris out there as well. We will be, let's see, we are going to take a 15-minute break here. So we've got 2:30. It will be 2:45 when we come back. That's East Coast time, depending upon where people are in the world. Last thing. We are going to be dropping in WhatsApp a quick survey that we are going to want you to take sometime the rest of the day. This connects with Lyndon, who Lyndon is being a provocateur author for the Leadership Forum community. He is writing a position statement about conscious leadership. And we have been doing some work in the Leadership Forum for a year and a half, exploring what does conscious leadership mean. This isn't about the Leadership Forum owning the space of conscious leadership. Who can possibly own a space on conscious leadership? This is about us trying to understand it better, put something out there, and think about all the different organizations and people that are doing this, and that maybe we can all come together to partner to think about how we can scale these things in the future. So, Lyndon, did I express that good enough?
I would perhaps encourage you to do is to take 5 minutes and do it right now, because we know if we say, well, do it sometime today, some people will, but most people will not. So it won't take very long. It's about 5 questions. It's about the conversation we've been having. So if you have the time to do it right now, I think Matthew is going to bring it up on the screen. Invite you to do that perhaps during the break.
We'll give you an extra 5 minutes for that. So you will get a 15-minute break and you will have 5 minutes to do that. You will be back here at what time? 2:50, 50 minutes after the hour.
Thanks, Joel. Could I ask the provocateurs and also the fish and Chris and Mark, if you can both turn on your microphone, your cameras, and then we can have a group provocateur picture. Everyone else, you can go to your breaks, but I'm just calling out for all the provocateurs.